Presumption is husband is father of a child born in valid marriage. Supreme Court rejects DNA test plea, says must be mindful of privacy breach. Supreme Court on Tuesday dismissed the argument of the woman and her son that legitimacy and paternity are distinct concepts, requiring separate determination. The court said legitimacy determines paternity under Section 112 of Indian Evidence Act until presumption is successfully rebutted by proving non-excess. Writing for the bench, Justice Surikant said the language of Section 112 of the Evidence Act makes it abundantly clear that there exists a strong presumption that husband is the father of the child born by his wife during the subsistence of their marriage. The section provides that conclusive proof of legitimacy is equivalent to paternity. The object of this principle is to prevent any unwarranted inquiry into the parentage of a child. Since the presumption is in favor of legitimacy, the burden is cast upon the person who asserts illegitimacy to prove it only through non-access, deciding the appeal filed by the man whom the woman claimed was her son's biological father. The top court spoke of the need to balance interest in such cases. When dealing with imminent need of DNA tests to prove paternity, the court balances the interest of those involved and must consider whether it is possible to reach the truth without the use of such tests. First and foremost, the court must therefore consider the existing evidence to assess the presumption of legitimacy. If that evidence is insufficient to come to a finding, only then the court considers ordering a DNA test. Once the insufficiency of evidence is established, the courts must consider whether ordering a DNA test is in the best interest of the parties involved and must ensure that it does not cause undue harm to the parties. It added that on one hand, courts must protect the parties' right to privacy and dignity by evaluating whether the social stigma from one of them being declared illegitimate would cause them disproportionate harm. On the other hand, courts must assess the child's legitimate interest in knowing his biological father, whether there is an imminent need for a DNA test. Touching on the need to protect privacy, it adds that permitting an inquiry into a person's paternity via a DNA test, we must be mindful of the collateral infringement of privacy and consequently of life and personal liberty as embodied in Article 21. Ben said forcefully undergoing a DNA test would subject an individual's private life to scrutiny from outside world. That scrutiny, particularly when concerning matters of infidelity, can be harsh and can eviscerate a person's reputation and standing in society. It can irreversibly affect a personal, social, and professional life. India rejects Canadian inquiry report. In fact, Canada meddling in our affairs. The Ministry of External Affairs rejected the probe report on Tuesday by Foreign Interference Commission, second most active, identifying India as the second most active country after China engaging in electoral foreign interference in Canada, and said that in fact it was Canada which has been consistently interfering in India's internal affairs. DeepSeek's lessons message. Why has China's startup DeepSeek shaken up Silicon Valley and triggered a stock market drought in the West? What are the implications of India and others in AI fray? Chipmakers Nvidia share price has witnessed the largest single-day decline for a US public company over concerns regarding the launch of an artificial intelligence model from Chinese startup DeepSeek, which triggered a broader sell-off in tech stocks across markets from New York to Tokyo. However, many are also seeing the sell-off as an overreaction to the new model, which, while potentially lowering the cost of developing a large language model, still means that American players continue to retain their leadership in the field. If Nvidia's meteoric rise surge was triggered by the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT in November 22, It took another upstart to trigger a dramatic collapse. Nvidia's shares closed Monday at almost 4-month low of $118, with the stock slide wiping off nearly $600 billion from American chipmakers' market value. As a result, tech-savvy Nasdaq index dropped by more than 3%. On Tuesday, two stocks in Tokyo started the day lower as the sell-off in tech counters continued. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, which opened on Tuesday, with Chinese tech companies such as Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu making early gains, was an exception. So were the Indian benchmark indices, which too ended up in Tuesday's trade. There could be three broad triggers for a stock market sell-off in the West. The big one is the realization that DeepSeek has managed to train a foundational model and Meta's Llama, but at a much lower cost by using far few chips. This set off concerns that red hot demand for specialized hardware needed to train AI models will now taper off. That is clearly a negative for companies like Nvidia. The other big concern is that America's lead over China in AI looks smaller than at any other time since ChatGPT was launched. China's catch-up is startling because it was seen as really far behind. That is disconcerting for many in the West, given that the Joe Biden administration has tried its best to slow down the Chinese AI advance by blocking exports of high-tech chips and machines used to manufacture these chips to that country. There are worries of successful, cheaper Chinese models that threaten to upend the economics of AI evolution. China's LLMs are decidedly cheaper, with QWQ, a model developed by e-commerce giant Alibaba, released around the same time as DeepSeek's R1 reasoning model, emerging in another contender for AI race. More importantly, DeepSeek's model was apparently trained using 2000 second-rate NVIDIA chips versus some 15,000 first-class chips for models such as Meta's Llama, according to economists. That changes the conventional perception of how investment intensive the training process of an LLM is before the next stage, inference, can be achieved. Inference starts refers to the process by which AI models generate responses to queries after they have gone through training on vast volumes of data scrapped off the internet. DeepSeek was started by hedge fund manager Liang Wenfeng in 21, when he started buying thousands of NVIDIA graphic processing units for what was then just an AI side project while running his trading fund High Flyer. DeepSeek's data crunching was originally aimed at leveraging AI to identify patterns that could affect stock prices. It was much later that the data crunching project turned into a standalone AI venture. All of those trading data inputs did offer the startup some pointers to jump on in early stages, and it benefited from access to high flyers computing power capacity. But then the venture did not did another other things differently. For instance, during the training process, the model often used rounding to make calculations easier. The cloud capacity were configured to ensure the model split tasks over multiple chips more efficiently, allowing a more dual clutch automatic gearbox in a car to ensure that chips commence the next step of a process even before the previous one was finished. DeepSeek has made most of its training results public and made the model more open source, something generally not done by Chinese players. Andrej Karpathy, former head of AI at Tesla, had said the Chinese company has made it look easy to train a frontier model on the joke of a budget. US President Donald Trump termed the advances by DeepSeek as a wake up call for US industries. The release of DeepSeek AI from Chinese companies should be a wake up call for our industries that we need to be laser focused on competing to win. Nvidia, after Monday's stock market rout, said DeepSeek's work has been achieved in compliance with US chip export controls and that chip makers continue to see strong demand for AI interference. The implications of this for countries such as India is that if foundational AI models can be trained relatively cheaply, then this will dramatically lower the entry barrier for nations too keen to build models on their own. The success of DeepSeek and Alibaba models have shown that the fixed cost of building models can be brought down, a vital factor for countries that hope to get into this race but are constrained by resources such as GPU availability or the funding needed for settling up a foundational model from scratch and scouring for the data that it needs to crunch. This also comes when there is a debate in India whether to build a foundational model from scratch or rely on already available LLMs to build wrappers on top of them. Infosys co-founder Nandan Nilekani has said India should not focus on building large language models while others in the AI industry, including Arvind Srinivas, the founder of Perplexity AI, stating that Nilekani's comment is wrong. He is wrong in pushing Indians to ignore model training skills and focus on building on top of existing models, essential to do both. Speaking on DeepSeek's breakthrough, he said in another post, I hope India changes its stance from wanting to reuse models from open source and instead trying to build muscle to train these models, their models. They are not just good for Indic languages but are globally competitive that are not just good for Indic languages but are globally competitive on all benchmarks. Two other issues could have bearing on this debate. In the last few days in office, the Biden administration released a regulatory framework controlling the export of AI hardware like NVIDIA graphic processing units. The US government has proposed to create three tiers of countries with different levels of export control restrictions, three tiers of countries with different levels of export control regulation, three tiers of countries with different levels of export control regulations. New Delhi is currently in the middle of procuring 10,000 GPUs to set up domestic AI computing capacity. The second is that this comes just ahead of Paris AI Summit, which focuses on broader agenda of global AI governance, innovation, and on ways of serving the largest public interest. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to co-chair the Paris Summit. The elephant in the room or the summit is likely to be China and astounding advances made by the country in AI despite efforts by Washington to thwart this progress. Fingerprint matching in crime investigation. 12 days after police lifted fingerprint from Bandra residence of Saif Ali Khan, it remains unclear whether they were left behind by Shariful Islam alias Vijay Das, the man who had been arrested for carrying out the knife on the Bollywood actor. Law enforcement agencies use fingerprints in two situations. Once the arrest is made, the print of the accused are checked against the database of the print to establish if they have a prior record of the crime. Police can also lift prints from the crime scene and check against the database. Under the Criminal Procedure Identification Act 2022, fingerprints of persons arrested for offences that carry a punishment of more than 1 year in jail can be stored. The so-called charge prints lifted from the crime scene can be used as evidence to establish the presence of an accused on the crime. This is what is being attempted in this case. Asser 24 enrollment of what lies ahead of early childhood education. In Maharashtra, fingerprints are lifted either by experts of the state CID or the trained officers. Prints are typically lifted off glass, metal, or plastic surfaces, usually only proper prints in which the top third of the finger or the holes and arches of that form the unique patterns of each are considered. Asser enrollment of what's ahead for child education. First is where do the learning levels stand in 2024 at an elementary level? covered under Right to Information Act, Right to Education Act. Both reading and arithmetic levels have improved the children in all grades in most states. In particularly, children in classes 1 and 3 show significant increases in 2022 as a report. NAP introduced structural changes, particularly by including the age 3 to 6 groups in the larger picture. Policy underlines the highest priority will be given to achieving universal foundational universal foundational literacy and numeracy (FLN). Universal foundational literacy and numeracy, launched in 21 National Initiative for Proficiency in Reading and Arithmetic and Numeracy Bharat, Nipun Bharat, was aimed at improving these skills. It aims universal FLN at the end of class 3 by 26-27. The latest survey found that at all India level, 83% of schools said that they received directives from the government to implement foundational literacy and numeracy activities. Around 78% said that at least one teacher in the school had been trained on FLN. The NEP states class 1 enrollment should happen at age 6. This is because going to school too early can be counterproductive. A child has to be cognitively and socially ready to cope up with what formal school brings in terms of curricular expectations or classroom behaviors. With a focus on ECCE, there is an acknowledgement that you prepare children not just to enter class 1 but also 3 years before that. If you if you get a child and a family ready for school, you also get the school ready for the children and eventually have the early childhood education structure come into place. Keeping with recent trend, the percentage of children in this age group not enrolled in school have gone down. This Kia survey also showed that in terms of digital access, more than 90% of rural adolescents have access to a smartphone. Children were evaluated on their ability to do tasks such as searching for information online or setting an alarm. In terms of both accessibility and skills, there were some gender gaps. For example, 80% of boys could browse the information against 78% of girls. Outlook on ECE. Any planning for achieving quality ECCE Early childhood care and education must start with a thorough and grounded understanding of current realities. ASER and Government Unified District Information System for Education ASER and the government's Unified District Information System for Education provide data in this age group, but more comprehensive and continuous data collection efforts are needed. Second, budget considerations are crucial. A key recommendation of NEP 2020 is to recruit workers, teachers specially to trained in the curriculum and pedagogy of ECC. Education departments need to work on a long-run commitment to budget allocations and processes for identifying, recruiting, training, and sustaining dedicated teachers for the pre-primary grades. With the Anganwadi system, if the early childhood care component is to be given higher priority, the requirement for additional resources must be specified and projected. Classroom success. ASA survey shows foundational learning skills have recovered post-pandemic. That's the cause of cheer and redoubling effort. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India had one of the longest school closures in the world. Digital learning logged vast numbers of underprivileged school children out of the classroom, and online classes struggled to replace the experience and quality of teaching in a physical classroom. Last year's economic survey pointed out that the gap between class standards and learning levels has widened since the pandemic. It noted that improving learning outcomes and undoing the COVID induced learning loss is more urgent than ever. Improving learning outcomes and undoing the COVID induced learning loss, COVID induced learning loss is more urgent need than ever. This survey, however, struck a note of optimism. The education sector is bustling with the across-the-board transformation led by NEP 2020, which is expected to yield foundational literacy and numeracy skills for every child passing the third standard in the near future. What is even more heartening is that government schools are at the forefront of this recovery. A large chunk of this credit, as the report points out, that should go to the national NEP's thrust on improving foundational learning skill. It notes that the states have adapted to NEP's prescriptions in different ways. All of them have adopted the policy's teacher-centric approach. Large-scale rollout of teacher training programs on foundational skills show the national commitment towards addressing a long-standing deficit. Training is slowly leaving a mark on ways teachers relate to students in classrooms, as the surveyors found that many teachers are now empathetic to the specific needs of students in early years of school. However, as ASER 24 indicates, our educating educators is still a work in progress. There cannot be a fixed pedagogical template to teach children in all schools, even if they are in the same grade. A fact underlined by NEP as well. Today, teachers seem to have limited opportunities to address classroom specific challenges. The ASER report therefore underlines the importance of post-training support to teachers. Crucially, decisions on what and how to teach are still based primarily on syllabus completion. Resolving the intent today, more than 100 million children are in the foundational learning stage. When these youngsters graduate from school, the country would be at a critical stage in realizing its demographic dividend. That window would then be open for almost other decade and other another half a decade and a half. Therefore, while policymakers can justify be upbeat about the good news from a survey, they would be mistaken in not reading the report in its entirety. They must give particular attention to the passages that underline the task ahead, the futures at stake. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri's Beijing visit signals a thaw in India-China ties. Security dilemmas, however, remain. The talks in Beijing between Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri and second senior Chinese officials, including Foreign Minister Wang Yi, are a welcome step in the ongoing normalization of India-China relations, especially as both countries mark 75 years of diplomatic ties this year. The broader context of Misri's Beijing visit, however, lies in the four-long-year disengagement process which concluded in November last year with the patrolling agreement for Depchong. In the four-year-long disengagement process, which concluded in November last year with the patrolling agreement for Demchok and Depsang, to friction points between China's incursion in the eastern Ladakh along the line of actual control in 2020. Chinese military actions were direct violation of these confidence building measures in place at the time, with the crisis escalating into the Galwan Valley clashes, which led to the first fatalities of India-China border since 1975. For the past 4 years, discussions between two sides have largely been limited to military issues at the border. This time, however, the talks centered around people-centric steps. Direct flights between India and China have been suspended in the early stages of COVID pandemic and remained halted after Galwan. Both countries have now agreed to resume direct flights and facilitate the issuance of visas. Kailash Mansarovar Yatra is also set to resume. Both sides are expected to engage in dialogue over trans-border rivers and share hydrological data. Despite these encouraging developments, prospects of genuine mutual understanding remain uncertain given the continued large-scale troop deployment by both countries. For the fifth consecutive year, India has maintained that disengagement should be followed by de-escalation and ultimately de-induction of the additional forces in eastern Ladakh. The latest disengagement agreements. Notwithstanding, the de escalation process is yet to commence. Ultimately, India seeks through withdrawal of Chinese troops to their peacetime positions. Another key issue is trade. India continues to face significant trade deficit with China, which has now surpassed $100 billion despite efforts to restrict Chinese imports. There are reports of Chinese authorities clamping down on exports for crucial manufacturing equipment, seemingly to impede the growth of global companies in India. Delhi, therefore, should be competent on the China question after the latest round of talks is a step forward. The Jawaharlal Nehru Award for International Understanding for 1984 was posthumously conferred on Indira Gandhi by President Jail Singh. Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi received the award on behalf of his mother and the presence of presidents of Tanzania, Mexico, and Argentina, and prime ministers of Sweden and Greece, who are in Delhi to attend the summit. A recovery and more. William Wadhwa. This year, Asser went back to almost all rural districts of the country to report on children's schooling status and basic reading and arithmetic levels. Data from Asser 24 helps track the progress of foundational literacy and numeracy skills across the country. 24 report has good news. It shows more than full recovery from post-pandemic learning losses. At the all India level, proportion of children in class 3 who are able to read the class 2 level has risen from 23% to 27% and fell drastically to 20% these 2 years. 2 years later, we have a full recovery of the proportion of class 3 children reading fluently at 27%. What is remarkable is that the recovery is completely driven by government schools. In rural India, government schools have already always lagged behind private schools in terms of learning levels. This is vast literature on learning differential between government and private schools, highlighting the fact that simply comparing learning levels across the two is misreading because of the self-selection effect. Children who go to private schools come from more affluent homes and have more educated parents. Nevertheless, Asser shows recovery has been pronounced in government schools. In arithmetic, both government and private schools have seen large jumps. What has led sudden improvement in learning levels? We have not seen improvements in this magnitude in the last 20 years since Asser has been presenting data. Everything seems to be unpinned towards National Education Policy 2020 and its focus on foundational skills. While this is not the first time that programs have been introduced to improve learning. What is different is that it is first time there have been a systemic national push to improve foundational learning outcomes. Almost all states have shown uh, improvements. In fact, low performing states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu have made remarkable recovery. Consider the case of Uttar Pradesh in 2014. Only 6% of government schools class 3 children could reach a class 2 level text. There was a steady improvement in next 4 years. 12% could read a class 2 level. UP was one of the few states not to post a learning loss for class 3 in 22, with the proportion rising to 16%. In 24, the proportion of government school class children in class 3 who are able to read class 2 level is 27.9%. This kind of improvement cannot be labeled just a recovery. It signals serious focus on improvement FLN abilities. This push has borne fruits in arithmetic and in class 5 learning levels as well as learning levels in UP government. The gender battlegrounds as regulation tightens in US, UK, complex rights versus science debate will emerge. Recent cases in US and UK offer some clues about what those debates would look like. On January 20, President signed an executive order announcing that it was the policy of US government that there were only two sexes and those two sexes were not unchangeable. Although the precise implications of that order are unclear, it brings into focus the debates around gender will be a key battleground in US, UK and other Western democracies. Recent cases in US and UK offer some clues about what debates will look like. In US, about half of the states have passed laws prohibiting sex transition procedures. in children. That includes Tennessee, which in 2023 prohibited certain medical interventions for the purpose of allowing children to identify with or live with an identity different from their biological sex. The three prohibitions in the three prohibited medical interventions were puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex transition surgeries. Transgender teenagers and their families, supported by the Joe Biden administration, challenged the Tennessee law, claiming that it violated the guarantee of equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the law on the basis that it treated all children alike. No child, whether born male or female, was permitted to receive those medical treatments. An appeal to the US Supreme Court was heard in December, and judgment is expected by summer. Turning to the UK, the regulatory landscape has changed dramatically over the last 12 months. Until early 24, children with uh, dysphoria, who considered that their gender identity is different from their biological sex, were routinely prescribed puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. In April 24, an independent review concluded that there was enough evidence to support safety or effectiveness of puberty blockers to manage there was not enough evidence to support that effectiveness of puberty blockers to manage gender dysphoria. Its recommendations to prohibit the use of puberty blockers in children was implemented a few months later. That will remain the law until 27 when another review on the subject is scheduled. The debate has also made its way into English courts. A child was born female started to identify a male at age of 12, his parents were separated and held opposing views whether medical intervention was appropriate. His father supported treatment for gender dysphoria. His mother did not. The disengagement culminated in mother filing an application asking in the English court, in effect, to monitor the child's situation and intervene if necessary. The father opposed the application on the basis that proceedings were prolonging the child's sisters. The child was 16 by the time the case reached the English Court of Appeal in late 24. This gave the child the ability under the English law to decide whether to accept her hormonal treatment subject to the court's supervision. Despite that, court accepted mother's application and chose to keep the proceedings alive. It reasoned that the regulatory environment was changing rapidly and it was possible that the outlook towards cross-sex hormones could change in the future. The result is that if a child consents to a hormonal treatment in the next 2 years until he turns 18, the court has the ability to veto that choice. The three issues arising from these cases are likely to assume significance. First, the are laws prohibiting medical interventions to address gender dysphoria discriminatory. They are obviously discriminatory against transgender people in one sense. Tennessee law in effect permits prescribing a testosterone treatment to assist gender male child, but prohibits a child born female that identifies as a male from getting the same treatment. But the issue is more complicated than that. As per their view, so long as law is based on scientific evidence, it simply prohibits treatments that are unsupported by adequate evidence. Second, to what extent the courts become involved in assessing the scientific evidence on which laws are based. Among the major points of debate, U.S. Supreme Court hearing whether the Tennessee law should be subjected to a rigorous level of scrutiny. Judging by the transcript of proceeding, Tennessee may have won that debate. The English court was similarly careful to observe the questions on policy. Third, in children are permitted and a child is consented to treatment, how interventionist should the courts be? English court concluded it would only intervene when necessary to protect the child from grave and irreversible mental or physical harm. It is easy to imagine other courts reaching a different conclusion. Making Europe great again. Popularity of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again highlights deepening ideological divisions with the West. Daily must pay attention to its impact on global geopolitics and economy. Political success of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement has sparked hopes for a similar political push in Europe dubbed Make America Great Again. Like in the Make Europe Great Again, like in the US, Europe, the objective of this movement is to upturn the current liberal order in Europe centered on open borders, open markets, supranational institutions, growing connections between MAGA and mega conservatives highlights the deepening ideological divisions within the West that are bound to have an impact on global landscape. Historically, Europe's internal conflicts, such as those between capitalism and communism, have profound influence across the world. This time will be no different. While the recent global discourse has often framed debates as West versus the rest or North versus the South, the more consequential debates are in fact within the West. For instance, Western conservatives share common ground between Russian President Vladimir Putin, who promotes Russian nationalism and celebrates traditional Russian cultures and values. Similarly, Chinese President Xi Jinping's worldview is rooted in nationalism and claim to an exceptional cynic civilization. Ironically, Russia and China, once the champions of Enlightenment universalism, are aligning more closely with Western conservatism on nationalism, traditional values, and sovereignty. The implications of these connections remain to be seen, but they cut across many presumed fault lines of international system today. For now, though, the focus is on ideological battles within the West, they culminate in Trump's victory in US elections last year. Europe is now facing its own challenges, including the fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's advancement in the auto industry. Trump is exerting direct pressure on European economy and security policy. His ally Elon Musk is using his platform X to challenge the traditional liberal and centrist consensus in European politics by supporting parties labeled as far right. Recently, Musk has engaged quite vigorously with the British and German politics. He launched a tirade against unchecked immigration and British tolerance of crimes in the nature of respecting cultural diversity. In Germany, he has endorsed Alternative for Germany, which is currently polling second after Conservative Christian Democratic Union. These external and internal pressures have poised to reshape European political landscape this year. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen asserts Europe is already great, citing its unique social market economy, robust trade sector, and higher living standards compared to global competitors. However, she acknowledges the need for change, stating that Europe has relied on global trade, cheap Russian energy, and Europe's security for too long to sustain growth over the next 25 years. Europe must adapt, prompting her commission to report on European competitiveness from Mario Draghi. Von der Leyen is expected to announce this week a roadmap to implement some Draghi reports and implementations. The relationship between Europe and major powers like Russia, China, and US is no longer a matter of concern for high state policy. It is being influenced by public sentiment on the street. Various European conservative parties are gathering in Brussels this week to find strategies to emulate Trump's electoral and policy success. Although these parties lack a unified platforms like the Republican Party, they hope to influence upcoming elections across the Europe. While they may not form governments independently, their growing strength has shifted the centrist parties further to the right. Across Europe, right wing movements are gaining traction due to voter worries about immigration, economic stagnation, cultural identity, and dissatisfaction with current political order. Collapse of Germany's government coalition and the upcoming election highlight this urgency. The AID has capitalized on the German discontent with traditional parties. European elites used to view their political culture as distinct, if not superior, to the US. However, American political influence has increasingly permeated European societies. Trump's MAGA movement has fueled the resurgence of far right in Europe. Trump's success has inspired nationalist movement in the West, offering a model for challenging established political elites. A strong stance against illegal immigration, woke ideology, and globalization resonates with many European leaders. Several factors have contributed to rise of radical right movements in Europe. Economic anxiety, years of stagnation worsened by COVID-19 pandemic, Ukraine war have led to inflation, housing shortages, and rising inequality. Concerns about immigration influx of migrants has raised fears regarding cultural identity and security. Far-right leaders have intensified these concerns. Cultural displacement, globalization, and multiculturalism has led to feelings of cultural erosion among some populations, disenchantment with the establishment, normalization of extreme rhetoric, disillusionment with the EU, and similar to the US, traditional structures of Western social, political, and economic organization are being challenged from the right in Europe. Money can't buy AI, DeepSeek's breakthrough shows big tech need not to be built on billions of funds. Top US AI developer companies rush to ana- analyze DeepSeek low-cost models. So that's all. See you in the next one. Or let's complete this. For ideological review, Trump orders pause to all federal grants and loans. President order paves way for ban on transgender troops. Sharp gains in reading and math learning levels in school across states since COVID slump. Modi may visit US in February. Have very good relationship with India. Uniform code has same spirit as sport all equal. Prime Minister at National Games. Let the games begin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi with Uttarakhand Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami during the opening ceremony of 38th National Games in Dehradun. More than 50, more than 10,000 athletes are expected to compete in 35 disciplines across 16 days. 79,000 crore loan, railways wanted as grant gets partial relief. DeepSeek Sputnik moment, 5 ways in which US-China AI race plays out for India. One is tragic salience of the moment. Historical comparisons are odious, but in terms of the sheer shock it produced. Second, in the intensification of geopolitical rivalry between US and China. Third is DeepSeek is the reminder that money buys many things, but it is not everything, certainly not love or the capacity for innovation. Fourth, Fourth, the room would be much larger if the US chooses the partnership model with allies to compete with China instead of going it alone. And finally, Sputnik is an important reminder that great powers will also embark on cooperation in advanced technology. Although Sputnik's launch in 1957 set off an arms race, outer space eventually provided a venture to cooperate. States demand hike in funds under PM Rural Housing Scheme. Want PM Gramin aid to be hiked to 2.5 lakh per unit from 1.3 to 1.3 lakh. So that's all. See you in the next one.